17 years after, I found an 8-year-old boy shining shoes behind a bus terminal in freezing sleet. His billionaire biological father stood in front of 200 people and held out the keys to a brand new Corvette. My son took the keys. Then he turned and looked at me. I want to tell you I knew what was about to happen. I didn't. I was standing near the back row of the Texas Tech Engineering Pavilion holding a plain white envelope with $280 inside, the most I could spare, without touching the money set aside for the property taxes on a house that still had my late husband's name on the mailbox. My good blouse was the same one I wore to my husband's funeral 11 years earlier. My knees had been bothering me since the walk from the parking lot, and I had not expected, when I woke up that morning, that by lunchtime a man I had never met would be trying to buy my son back. It started on a January night outside the Amarillo bus terminal, 17 years before that graduation. I was 44 then, working the overnight shift at a truck stop diner off Interstate 40, and I'd stayed late covering for a girl whose car wouldn't start. By the time I clocked out, sleet was coating the parking lot in a thin, dangerous glaze. That was when I saw him. A small boy crouched near the terminal doors with a plastic shoe shine box, breath fogging in front of him. No coat, just a hoodie 2 sizes too small. He held up a rag toward a man walking past. "Shine your shoes, sir?" 50 cents. The man didn't even slow down. I watched 3 more people walk past him before I crossed the lot myself. "You got a permit for that operation?" I asked. He flinched like I'd raised a hand. I lifted both of mine empty. "I'm teasing. Honey?" He studied me the way you'd study a dog you weren't sure would bite. "You want a shine or not? How much for both shoes and a straight answer?" "The shine's 50 cents. Answers are extra." That almost got a smile out of him. Up close, his lips had gone the color of the sleet. "When'd you last eat something warm?" I asked. "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." He looked away, toward the terminal, toward nothing. There was a vending machine inside with hot chocolate, and I told him I was buying one for myself and he was welcome to stand near the heater while I did. He followed, 3 steps behind the whole way, like he was ready to bolt the second I turned my back. I asked his name. He hesitated so long I thought he wouldn't answer. "Caleb." "I'm Linda." He nodded but gave me nothing else. I asked where his people were. His whole body went rigid. "I'm fine," he said again, like the words were a wall he could hide behind. An 8-year-old shining shoes alone, at a bus terminal past midnight in a sleet storm is not fine, and we both knew it. I stepped away and called the police, quietly, or so I thought. When I turned back around, the spot where he'd been standing was empty. I found him 2 rows of parked cars away, slipping on the ice, trying to run on legs that had gone numb from cold. "I'm not taking you anywhere," I called out. "You called them." "I did. I'm not going back." "Back where?" He wrapped both arms around the shoe shine box like it was the only thing he owned, which it turned out it was. A caseworker named Patricia Ruiz arrived almost an hour later, and what she told me in the parking lot changed the rest of my life before I'd even decided to let it. Caleb had run from a foster placement 2 counties over the night before. An older boy in that home had been taking his food and worse, and the foster parents hadn't caught it in time. His mother had died when he was 3. His father, Patricia said, was unknown or unwilling, and nobody had ever come looking. I didn't take Caleb home that night. That's not how it works, whatever the shows make you believe. But I called Patricia the next morning, and the morning after that, and I kept calling for 8 months while I went through background checks and home inspections and financial reviews that felt more like interrogations than paperwork. The day Caleb finally walked through my front door carrying everything he owned in a black garbage bag. He stood in my living room and asked, "How long am I staying?" "As long as they'll let me keep you," I said. He didn't like that answer. For weeks he hid crackers under his mattress and slept with his shoes by the bed, packing his bag every morning before school, because some part of him expected to be moved again before dinner. One evening he knocked a glass off the counter. It shattered across the kitchen floor, and Caleb froze the way you freeze in front of an oncoming car. His face went white. I picked up the broom. "It's just a glass, baby." We've got more where that came from. He stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. That's it? What else would there be? His chin started shaking, and then he sat down right there on the kitchen floor and cried harder than I'd ever seen a child cry, like something in him had been waiting years for permission. 2 years later, a judge finalized the adoption. Outside the courthouse, Caleb asked me, "Does this mean nobody can send me somewhere else?" "Not unless you plan on putting me in a home someday yourself." He laughed and called me Mom for the first time that afternoon. What I didn't know then, what I wouldn't learn for another 15 years, was that Caleb's biological father had known exactly where his son was almost the entire time. By the time Caleb was 14, he'd been suspended once for putting his fist through a locker after a classmate called him a charity case in front of the whole lunchroom. I picked him up from the principal's office with his knuckles split and his jaw set like concrete. I didn't tell him I understood. I told him he was apologizing. "He started it," Caleb said. He used words. "You used your fist. Which one of those actually solves anything?" He didn't speak to me the whole drive home. I stopped at the Dairy Queen anyway. "Thought I was grounded," he said, staring at the sign. "You are. Grounded kids still eat." Over a blizzard he'd barely touched. I told him he didn't have to be ashamed of where he came from. But he didn't get to use it as a permission slip to become cruel either. He apologized the next morning. He didn't mean every word of it, but he said them, and that mattered. By high school, Caleb had become the kind of student teachers remembered. Not the loudest hand in the room, but the one who stayed after class asking why something worked the way it did. When he took pre-calculus, I spent 3 nights at the kitchen table relearning math. I hadn't touched since 1986. Just so I could sit with him while he studied. When he got into Texas Tech for petroleum engineering, he ran into the kitchen holding the acceptance letter over his head like a trophy. The scholarship covered tuition. It didn't cover the housing deposit, the lab fees, or the meal plan nobody warns you about in the brochure. I told him we'd figure it out. So I sold my late husband's old bass boat, the one he and I used to take out to Lake Meredith before the cancer took him. A man from Lubbock gave me $3,800 for it and hauled it away behind his truck, leaving 2 pale tire tracks across my yard. Caleb noticed the empty spot the next weekend he came home. "You sold the boat. It was just sitting there." That was Dad's boat. It was mine too, and I decided where it went. He looked away and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and told me one day he'd buy me a better one. I told him I'd settle for him paying his own phone bill on time. None of that prepared either of us for graduation day, or for the black SUV parked outside the pavilion with a cherry-red Corvette beside it. A red ribbon stretched across its hood, catching the Texas sun bright enough to hurt your eyes. His name was Richard Voss. And if you've ever seen a gas station in 5 states with his energy, company's logo on the pumps, you already know who I mean. He walked to the podium after the university, announced a special guest speaker, flanked by 2 men in suits who looked like they'd never once stood in a sleet storm in their lives. He talked about innovation and legacy for almost 2 full minutes before his voice changed. "There's another reason this young man matters to me," he said. Caleb went very still. "I am his biological father." Nobody in that pavilion clapped. The air conditioning was the only sound for what felt like a very long time. A man behind Voss stepped forward holding a leather key case. Through the glass wall behind them, the Corvette sat waiting like a promise somebody had already decided to keep. "You've spent your whole life proving what kind of man you'd become," Voss said, holding the keys out. "It's time to come home." Caleb reached out and took them. My fingers tightened around the cheap white envelope in my purse, and for one ugly second I looked down at it and felt ashamed of everything it wasn't. Then Voss's assistant handed Caleb a cream-colored folder and said there was just one small formality before they could leave together. A man stepped forward offering a pen. Caleb took the folder but not the pen. "What exactly is this?" he asked. "A family reintegration agreement," Voss said smoothly. "It simply protects everyone's privacy going forward." Caleb opened it slowly, flipping past pages tabbed in yellow, signature lines, initial boxes, and one paragraph that made him stop cold. He read it out loud for the whole room to hear. I acknowledge that Richard Voss made reasonable and consistent efforts to remain present in my life. Caleb looked up. Is that true? Voss's smile thinned. It's standard language. That's not what I asked. A woman in a plain gray blazer rose from the third row. No assistance, no security, just a leather folder of her own. Her name was Renee Castillo, and she represented the independent trustee overseeing the estate of Richard Voss's late father, Caleb's grandfather, who had died 8 months earlier and left a trust for all legally verified grandchildren, biological or not. A routine record search during the estate review had led straight to Caleb. A DNA comparison confirmed what Voss had apparently known unofficially for years. He does not have to sign anything to receive what's legally his, Renee said. He doesn't have to take your name. He doesn't have to accept a job at your company. And he does not have to sign away his right to describe his own childhood. Honestly, the folder in Caleb's hands suddenly looked like exactly what it was. Not a welcome home, but a leash with a bow on it. How long have you known where I was? Caleb asked his father. Voss hesitated. I received updates over the years. How long, exactly? Since you were 9. The room went dead quiet. Did your lawyers tell you not to send a birthday card in all that time? Caleb asked. Or was that your idea? Voss didn't answer. Caleb closed his hand around the Corvette key, and for one terrible second, I thought he was about to walk toward that black SUV. Instead, he turned to Renee. Once the title clears, can this be donated? To the Foster Youth Transition Program specifically. Voss's face went white. That car is worth over $100,000. Then it'll cover a lot of first apartments for kids aging, out of the system with nobody waiting. For them at the door, Caleb said, which is more than I had until she showed up. He didn't point at me. He didn't have to. Somebody near the front started clapping first, and within seconds most of the pavilion was on its feet. And I barely heard any of it, because I was watching Richard Voss's composure crack for the first time all afternoon. Voss's company faced an internal review not long after, once records surfaced, showing he'd paid private investigators to track Caleb for years under a line item labeled risk management. He didn't lose everything. Life rarely resolves that cleanly. But 6 months later, Renee called while Caleb and I were splitting a plate of enchiladas at my kitchen table and told us the trust claim had been fully approved, no conditions attached. Then she added that Voss had requested one more meeting. No lawyers, no assistants, just the 3 of us alone. We picked a small diner off the interstate, the kind with a neon sign and truckers parked outside at all hours. Voss showed up early, in jeans and a plain jacket, no entourage, looking smaller than he had at that podium. I've rehearsed this conversation 100 times, he said once we'd sat down, and every version sounded like I was defending myself. He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. I told myself for years that leaving you safe with someone else was the same as being a father. It wasn't. He looked at Caleb directly. I came back because my father's death forced old records open, and I was terrified of what people would find. Not because you needed me. He didn't make an excuse after that. He just said he was sorry and stopped talking, which is more than most people manage. Caleb listened to all of it before he answered. I believe you're sorry, he said. But being sorry doesn't erase 17 years. If we're going to have any kind of relationship, there are going to be rules. Voss nodded before Caleb had even finished the sentence. You don't show up unannounced. You don't call her my adoptive mother. And if you lie about any of this again, even once, we're done. I accept that, Voss said. And for the first time all day, I believed him. Caleb used part of the trust to pay off the last of my mortgage without asking me first. I argued about it for 3 straight days. You didn't raise me so I'd owe you, he said. Exactly. You raised me so I'd know how to take care of people. That's what I'm doing. I didn't have a good comeback for that. The following spring, he drove me out to Lake Meredith, where a modest little aluminum boat was waiting, tied up at the dock, nothing fancy, Just about the right size for 2 people and a cooler. You kept your promise, I told him. No, he said, grinning. You kept yours first. Before we drove home that evening, he asked a stranger to take one photo of the two of us, not beside the boat, not beside the lake, but standing next to my old faded blue pickup truck in the parking lot, my arm through his. Smile, Mom, he said. I did. That's the photo on my mantle now, not the Corvette. Not the lake house Voss offered twice and Caleb turned down twice. Because the truck is what carried him here in the first place. I've thought a lot since then about why growing older scares people the way it does. It's not really the aching knees or the smaller paycheck. It's the fear of becoming unnecessary, of waking up one day and realizing the person you spent your whole life loving has simply moved on past you. Caleb taught me something different. If you raise someone with patience and honesty for long enough, eventually they stop needing you to fix every single problem. But they never stop knowing exactly where home is. Blood can explain where a child started. It can't explain who actually stayed. Richard Voss gave Caleb his life. I just got lucky enough to be there for the rest of it. If somebody in your life ever proved that family is built by showing up and not by blood, I'd love to hear their story in the comments. And if this one meant something to you, subscribe, because there's another story just like it waiting next week.